Hello and welcome to Askimo TV. Today we're sitting with Michael Friedman, the Executive Director of Asquith Merchant Bank. We're talking about merchant banking, businesses, turning a profit and running a company. So what we'd like to talk about now is who should you be getting advice from when you're thinking about starting a company or you're already running a business? Where should you be looking for advice?
Well, there are a range of professionals who will always be around any business or even any individual. So the likelihood is that if you started a business, you probably have to have an accountant and you probably have a lawyer. And one of those two will probably have even registered your company in the first instance. So those are probably your first two natural ports of call to get advice from. And then you have a range of other people who naturally come into the life cycle of any business. So you will have had to have opened a business bank account, and that means that you have a relationship manager at your bank. And that might turn out to be a useful source of advice when you come to grow your business and you want to understand what your range of options are if the bank can provide you with extra capital to do so. And then beyond that, you start to get into much more specialized and much more sophisticated forms of advice, which may come from those same people or people within their companies, and certainly people with the same job description, albeit they may be at different companies. So for example, your high street accountant who helps you to set up a business and then to do your basic accounts may not be the same accountant who can then provide you with advice on how to float your company. So you have different types of professionals. But basically, anyone who is a professional in inverted commas is likely to be able to provide you with advice. And I think there are different types of advice to bear in mind. So you have fairly dry advice, or hard advice, which is accounting, legal, tax affairs, banking, and so on. And then you have the whole soft side of advice, which is mentoring, coaching, and that's really what you need to look to people who sit on your board to provide you, is a slight step outside what's called non-executive directors, and people who are there to keep an eye on what you're doing, who are not involved on a day-to-day basis and are a bit more objective in what you're doing. And that may be a fairly professional relationship where they're just looking at the business, or especially in a small business that you start, it may well be that you have senior members of your family or friends who've got good experience, and they're also there to provide you a degree of emotional support and some personal training around the way that you're behaving in the business and what do you need to do to develop your skills to continue to run that business. So those are examples. And then obviously you have more specialized things like, for example, if you start to grow, you may need to hire a human resources consultant, or you may need the services of a headhunter, and so on and so forth. But broadly, I think I would separate it into two categories, which are professional services and what I would call more personal services, to do with how you as the entrepreneur are developing and how you're behaving in your firm.
So you mentioned a board of directors. Do you think there's the right time to start to assemble a board, and when is it? And who would you recommend sits on the board?
It depends very much on what exactly you're doing. So if you're running a classic company, which is probably about 60 or 70% of the limited companies that you will find in the United Kingdom, for example, you probably never need to employ anybody to be an outside member of your board. Probably sufficient to have the 2 or 3, depending on how your company is formed, compulsory members of your board, which are probably going to be members of the family, members of the business that you're in. You're not going to have to look too far externally. As soon as you're doing anything like, for example, what we're doing, where we're investing money, you immediately get to a point where you want to have outsiders who are there and providing a level of oversight, which gives a level of comfort to your investors that it's not just 2 or 3 guys running the money with nobody else looking at it, but there are independent people who have one eye on what you're doing. It depends entirely on the nature of your business as to the correct points to bring in other people and what they tend to look like.
You also mentioned the idea of having a mentor, which is something that many business professionals, CEOs or executives enjoy having. How would you suggest someone goes about securing a relationship with a mentor?
Well, I think that in any business that one starts up, there's usually some character or a number of people around you that immediately are the people you seek to get advice. And that's often not just practical, but as I say, it's often quite personal. It's to do with, I'm having this difficulty and I'm trying to come to terms with it. How do I best manage this difficult discussion that I have to have? Or, if I'm negotiating to bring in some outside partner, what do I think they should get versus what I have? And so on and so forth. So that sort of person that you naturally look to provide that kind of advice is probably the right person to have as a coach or a mentor. Increasingly, there are really good organizations out there in any country that starts to have an entrepreneurial sector who can help to provide that. So there's a global organization called TIE, which is one example, and they have fellowships around the world, and they now have 64 chapters, including in the UK, in the US, in Israel. It's originally an Indian organization, so all over the Indian subcontinent. And they provide mentors and coaches to entrepreneurs when they're starting out in their business. And later on in life, if you become a successful entrepreneur, you can become a mentor or a coach through that organization and give back to help other young entrepreneurs to get started. And they're just one of many such organizations that exist.
Okay, Michael, thank you very much for your time. That's been great.